Hey guys, this will be video 7 for the how to design build a 58 Explorer replica, sometimes using Stuart McDonald templates. And but however, most of it you're just building off the top of your head. What I'm going to cover in this video is just very briefly talk about the neck, very briefly, and then I'm going to spend most of the time talking about preparing to do binding. And also, this guitar will have a bound fretboard as well. So I may talk about that a little bit if I remember, but it's not very important. But basically, I just wanted to show the work since video 6, where I shaped it in and just turning it into an actual guitar. And all you're doing is you're just working what's in front of you to make it feel really comfortable. But in so doing, it causes you to have a little bit of a swing right here, and then it rounds over into that line right there, and then which forces this to just create a radius right here where it's kind of flat right here, and all of a sudden it starts radiusing down and then rounding and just blending and meeting all that. And then over here, this is just your traditional, that's how you would do your traditional 3x3 side, whether it's a jazz guitar, a Gretsch, anything with a 3x3 side, an acoustic guitar, then that's kind of what you're shaping for. I remember, and this is something that's kind of funny, I remember when I very first started doing this, I always thought this location right here would have been concaved. For some reason I thought, okay, so you're working up here and all of a sudden it's got a concave and scoop, but it's not. It convexes all the way and continues to convex until it just simply flattens out. And one of the first guitars I carved, I remember thinking, what in the world? It's just all the material's gone, and I had this crazy scoop going on right here and right here. And I realized, oh wow, all it is it's just a continuation of this convex surface right here, continuing up until it just twists and compounds into the flat. So it's very enjoyable to carve that once you figure out what it is you're doing. But then up here, you're just allowing whatever's going on with your headstock to radius in. And then, if it was a 3x3 side, that's where you would get the opportunity to do the stinger, like the black stinger, if you wanted to. But I've attempted to do a black stinger. I didn't do the actual stinger. I just used some black construction paper and tried to create a stinger for this design, and it's just not out there. It doesn't look good at all. Okay, so I'm gonna stop talking about that, but nonetheless, this one's fit and ready to go in. The only thing I will cover here for the client is, yeah, I do need to cover this because I may have just briefly talked about it, but not so much so where Ed could see what I was talking about. Okay, right now the heel is still about a 32nd of an inch too thick, which is intentional because you wouldn't sand it flush until after it's glued in and dried and all that jazz. So that's where you're actually doing all your finished blending. And I have no idea what you might be able to see over here, but it's turning out really good. It's really beautiful on both sides. But nonetheless, if we were to do the flush heel, obviously it's flush, which I really like the idea of doing the flushed heel on this. But if we did the stepped heel, it wouldn't be much. It would only be about what is it, 3/16? Yeah, it'd be about around 3/16 of an inch. It's kind of hard to show. I'll do the best I can to show it on here. But that would be, I think I've already covered this a little bit in the last video. But nonetheless, your step two would be something like that. But I'll shoot straight with you, Ed. The 58 design would have been flush on the back, even though it's different from this. It would have been flush. And I like the idea of, since everything we're doing here is definitely based on like the 50s specs more so, I think it would be better to start out with that flushed. And then if we didn't like it, I can always route off what material I need, which would basically be about 3/16 of an inch, and then round that over by hand and stuff like that. So there's ways I can do that later on. But I think the flush design would be really, really beautiful. And every I have 3 Explorer replicas in the basement here. One's a hollow body and 2 are solid, and every one of them have the flushed heel. They're flush on the back. Just because that's, you know, more likely to uh, echo what would have been going on in the 50s. Okay, so I don't think I need to talk about the neck anymore. So with that said, let me just actually set it over here out of the way and not out of sight, but pretty much close to out of mind. Hold on one second. Okay, the main thing I want to cover in this video is talking about getting ready to do your binding and doing this route work right here. So I'm going to spend quite a bit of time just talking about how I actually pull that off. And it's actually a very safe process. The router base that I built makes all the difference in the world. So before you do binding, you obviously have to route that channel. And most of our routers have that base right there. And the reason I like doing the single piece binding, you can use the, where is that material? Yeah, you can use the 60 thousandths binding and do a 1/16 inch router channel, and it's just about a finished guitar. It's amazing. It's so close to flush right here that it just really is. It makes for a very simple build. Well, it's not simple, but it's much quicker than doing, you know, multiply binding. And all I do is I take a 1/2 inch face bit, but I take the 1/2 inch bearing off and I put a 3/8 inch bearing on there, and then that allows me to, with a single pass, do the router channel. Okay, and it works extremely well. And the funny thing is, I wish I had a shorter bit identical to that, but I can't remember what it was when I was buying these bits. I don't think they had it in stock. So what happened? It forced me to machine 2 little lifts for the router base. Therefore, once the router goes in, you know, obviously it's only projecting out. It finishes out just slightly under 5/16 of an inch, because the vintage binding, it wasn't a quarter, and you would think, oh, it's a 1/4 inch binding. Believe it or not, it's the quarter is super chintzy. They had taller binding, and it wasn't exactly 5/16 of an inch, but it was pretty darn close to it. So basically, but with my router base right here, this is a 3/8 inch acrylic, and as you can see, it's already a substantial platform by which I can control the router. Not only is this extremely stable, it doesn't need these blocks right here to keep it stable, but they certainly don't hurt, of course. But it's almost necessary when you're routing out, when you're running a router out into an area like that right there. You struggle keeping it from tipping, and especially like tipping off like that. Excuse me. And you might think, well, it's not that big of a deal because you've got the bearing helping you keep it under control. But if you're relying on the bearing, you'll very easily burn a trench into your mahogany. You only want the bearing to just kind of kiss the body as you're working across it, almost just to where it is necessary, but you're really relying on just the bearing to just kiss it and to keep you under control, not force up into the body, because you'll definitely burn the bearing up into the burn a trench into the body. Sorry, but it's really important out here, obviously, on this corner as well, because see, when you're doing this route, you should be moving in this direction right here. And then once you get out here, obviously, as I just covered, you won't have any substantial material out there. But with this base right here, you're able to keep your palm planted right here. Not that you would, but you could just about route it with one hand. you know, and then once you get here, you're turning, and you're always keeping this base on the top of the body. You know, when you're doing this route right here, you definitely do not want to do climbing cuts with this right here, because it'll get you in major trouble right here. Like if you were coming in, cutting in this direction, and then pushing in this way, it could run away with you, or either worse, it would do exactly what happened to me. This is very, very typical of what happened to me when I had to rebuild the headstock. That tear out right there, it would have been that type of situation where I made a dumbass move and was probably, I was doing it on the table and I probably got just confused, and I did a climbing cut when I should have been doing a pushing cut. Yeah, probably what I did was okay, the router bit is turning this direction right here. So it's turning counterclockwise. I know exactly what I did. I probably, see, even now I'm getting confused. I'm having trouble explaining it. Where I was, no, I was doing a climbing cut. I was pushing into it like this right here, and it started chattering and jumping. And when it jumped, it grabbed it right there and tore that out. So now let's flip the whole operation over 180 degrees. The same mistake could be made out here if you were doing a climbing cut where it would start jumping, and then it might jump into the body and then tear out. So, not being dramatic there, but when you're cutting, just always make sure you're doing pushing cuts. I say that, do climbing cuts when you want to or when you know you can, but always be really careful about end grain, because what is that? That is definitely an end grain tear out, indicative of chatter. Because see, the grain is going in this direction right here, and that's what will happen. And this job was literally, well, you can see it. It was literally 99% finished, almost 100%, and then chump, 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 it tore out right there. Could I have repaired it? I don't think so. I really don't. It was close, but it tore out pretty bad right there. If it were my guitar, for a personal player, hell yeah, I would have just repaired that, because I'm not saying I don't care, but stuff like that doesn't bother me if it's on my own personal guitar. And if it was paint grade, absolutely, man. I would be epoxying some mahogany in there and feathering it all together. But just know the importance of doing what I call pushing cuts, and make yourself a really nice large base there, and that'll help you always stay planted to your subject and have control of your tool. Okay, so then after you've got your binding channel routed, you're ready to move in the direction of using the binding cement to do the binding. And I haven't tried many other things, but this stuff right here, I'm going to get it off the table, does not work. I did attempt, and I bought this from a company that sells guitar parts, and they sold it as a binding glue, and it just did not work. So if you might be able to use it in certain operations, but this is about $30 for this little amount. This is 2.4 ounces. So $30 for this plus shipping. It ends up being about closer to $40 by the time if you just ordered it from Stuart McDonald. But the most important thing about it is to have like a glass jar like that, and I always keep it standing up, and then obviously work it from the bottom up. It only happened once where I had about that amount right there. That's a fairly full tube, and I was storing it on its side, and the air that was in there caused every bit of the glue to just dry up, and it was so sickening because I knew there was an enormous amount of cement in there. But had I have kept it stored vertical, then because of gravity, all the glue would obviously go to the bottom, and then you could start working your way up like this and keep the air out. And I actually think yes, look at that. That's so cool. I'll show you how cheap I am. But there's the glue right there on the top. So there's absolutely no air in there, and there's just enough left right there to do just a little bit of binding work if I need to. Okay, but very good stuff. It's called Stewart McDonald Bind All Guitar Binding Glue Cement, wood and plastic. So if you're doing like exotic wood binding, it's exceptional for that as well. I sometimes will use a CA glue, but not often. I've gotten so good with this stuff that I just use it now. But with that said, and I'm not going to do any binding because, quite frankly, you could go on the Stewart McDonald website and they've got videos that show you how to do this. But because I'm right-handed, I always start in that location right there. But I've got my heat gun, obviously, which what I do is I'm going to put this in some warm water first and get it really pliable. But then my 300, I think this is a 300. I actually wish it was less because even to me that's hot. That hurts. That hurts. That that's to me that's too hot. And then obviously you could you could burn the skin off your hand. But nonetheless, this is a good gun. Big box hardware store, probably any of your big box stores, $30, give or take. It's a great tool, but I like the idea of putting this in some extremely warm water, not hot, obviously not boiling, but get it a little bit soft, really dry, and then start right here in that location. And then usually what I do is I'll glue that location right there, and I'll do it dry. Let me see if I can keep that on the camera. The last thing I want to do is try to do it the actual cement work because I need to be on the other end of the table. I need to be just completely out of view. So in other words, there's no way I could do it on camera. But the operation is typically I get the starter tape on it like that, and then I get my put a little bit of glue in here. Well, put glue in there. You want it to really squeeze out. Don't worry about the glue getting into the mahogany. It's not going to stain anything or hurt anything. But what's going to be happening is if you're fortunate and you've got excessive amount of binding, then let it hang over. But the amazing thing about the perimeter, the perimeter of this actual guitar is just almost 66 inches. And this binding is exactly 66 inches. So if I'm really, really good, I'm going to start my binding. Don't risk it and make certain that you don't slip, because if you slip and do this entire binding job, you'll remove this tape only to discover that you've got to show how good you are in the most visible location of the entire build of gluing in a little fillet right there. And it's not hard. It's not impossible, but it's a pain in the what. So basically, I'll be doing the glue, installing the glue, and before any tape work goes on at all, just press this down and hold it, and I'll be keeping an eye on it while I'm only gluing in the area where I'm pressing, and I'm making certain that I'm pressed down. They're both are just as important, as well as I'm really making certain that I'm pressed up into the body, and then sit there for about 2 to 3 minutes. And I will say this: after you finish binding a job, your hands, your knuckles are going to be so sore that if you have any amount of arthritis at all, it's gonna take you days to recover. And I'm actually getting to that point at my age where it's pretty painful doing a binding job. So not complaining. I'm just saying, just be forewarned. It's pretty brutal on your neck muscles, your back muscles, and I personally, as far as building a guitar, this is by far the most absolutely difficult part of the entire build, physically and especially mentally, because if you're working around this corner at the end of the job and then it breaks on you in a corner, well, you've got to make a determination of how do you repair that and start over. Let's say it broke, right there in the middle. It's very unlikely that you're going to be able to get a real beautiful join with the broken piece. You're probably going to have to come back in this location right here and do a miter, and then and even maybe come back a little bit further here so you can get a true nice glue join here, and then really make certain that your binding is actually warm enough to turn that curve the next time around. But then don't overdo it and melt the crap, because what will happen if you overheat it, when you're going around that corner, it'll just crush and spread, and then it'll flatten out. And it's kind of one of those damned if you do, you know what, if you don't things. But nonetheless, after I've got it glued in, and I know it's obvious that I've truly got a little bit of overhang right there, then I push the tape up against it, and then carry the tape across right there. And I reach over, see I'm kind of keeping under control, and then I'm making certain that it's where I want it. And you don't have to put it, this is all, I'm going to show you what happens if you pull too hard. Because it's on that corner, it automatically just forces the tape to start tearing. Now they make actual binding tape that's more narrow, and that stuff is super, super strong. But what you can do in those corners, see, this is why you wanted to hold it first and really let it dry. But you can have some narrow pieces cut, and then just, again, you don't have to have crushing pressure on this, because see, you've already held it in place as it's drying. But keep in mind, this is 66 inches long, and it's like a wildcat tail flapping all over the table. And what does it want to do? It wants to pull it loose. And unless you're holding a real good connection to it, it will very easily pull loose. Even though you feel like it's really well glued, it'll start pulling loose on you. And once it pulls loose, you're going to have to drop a little bit of acetone in there and a little bit more glue, and maybe try not to panic. And see, because that's flat, I can put some pretty serious clamping pressure on that. And that'll guarantee that you're going to have a really beautiful binding job. And the entire guitar, after it's all said and done, is going to be mummified, the entire thing. So make certain that you've got a fresh roll of tape. And I built this based on the Stuart McDonald tape station, but it works really well. It's just, take a view. But I like this because I can clamp it. I can clamp it on the edge of a table, or I've got it designed where I can screw it down. Like my other table is like a old commercial solid mahogany. No, it's a Douglas fir, a commercial door. It's 1 3/4 of an inch thick, and I've got certain locations on that tabletop where I literally just screw this down to the table. Like if I'm working on a certain type of guitar, then I need the taping station over here. It's just a hacksaw blade where you can works. Simple cowboy's way of doing it, but does it work? Absolutely. And that was a little bit short right there, but nonetheless, that's how the whole guitar is going to look. And your fingers. One way you could get some maybe get some saddle soap and put a little bit of saddle soap on your hands, but just know that it's going to be pretty funny. Your fingers are going to be covered in glue, just because what's going to happen, like once you get at this point where you're getting ready to heat that and go around that corner, now you're going to be taking your glue and you're going to be gluing in here up to however far you're comfortable. But basically, I would probably only glue up to about right there and then stop, because by the time so want to push on that, but I know it probably will break because it's not heated. But as you're pushing that out, this is what I learned from Robert Benedetto. You're pushing along the binding, and I wish there was some way I could show this. You're pushing onto the binding here, but you've also got your thumb up here, pushing the glue forward, and then just keep pushing until you see the glue disappear, and then you're holding everything in place. And see, with that location right there, oh, this is turning, and you think it looks chaotic right now, you have to really focus on keeping your table insanely clean, because again, keep in mind, this is not just 16 or 18 inches long. This is 66 inches long, and you've got to fight it or allow it to flow without, breaking, of course. But then you're working your way, and then as you're holding this and letting it dry, then you're reaching over here, and you're reaching down like that. Put a little pressure, pull across the top. Because I'm right-handed, it works best for me to push and hold, do my tape work. See, if I was working the other way, I'd be working left-handed. So it works best for me to work counterclockwise. Okay, and so I say that to say this: give it a whirl. Binding is only about $11 to $12 for 66 inches, and that's a 60 thousandths by 5/16, a 1/16 inch route depth, which was achieved by using a very basic 1/2 inch router bit with a 3/8 inch bearing and a quality, router base. Or if you've got an exceptional flat top router station table, this is a breeze. I mean, it'll be very easy to cut that channel if you've just got the proper tools. But I do so little binding. Well, I don't want to say that. I take that back. Actually, I'm getting to the point where I'm doing a lot more than I used to. But I did an enormous amount of binding about 18 years ago when I was building the hand-carved acoustic jazz guitars. And it's so funny, in hindsight, when I look back on all that, I came right out of the gate. My first builds were the most difficult guitar you could ever want to build. And I was only doing it because of the Robert Benedetto video series. And speaking of, I've said this numerous times, damn you, Robert Benedetto, for making it look so easy. And I don't know if I covered it. I think this is the third or fourth time I've done this video. I don't think I've talked about it in this video. Robert Benedetto, when he's doing his large body jazz guitars, he was starting out with, I think he was doing a seven ply top. I've lost it. Oh, it's in my hand. I want to say he was doing a 7-ply binding, and he was doing every bit of it at once, or he did every bit of it once. And I'm sure if he still does any binding at all, that's how he probably does it, because it's one of those things you can't buy this binding. I think you can buy like 3-ply, 20 or 60 thousandths in 3-ply, and that's probably okay. But forget it if you're going to be trying to do a Les Paul custom corner. That's that's the amount of wood that is left when you route up into everything's hard to get to, but we all know that the horn on a Les Paul or a Gretsch Penguin, Dual Jet, any of that stuff, they're much more round. But by the time you route up into it, in order to receive, all this binding, this turns into a very, very sharp point right here. And I don't think you would be able to have like 3 pieces of binding that is already machined together where you're able to turn that corner. I may be wrong. I mean, if I'm wrong, I'm just wrong. But maybe go online and check that out. Or again, as I mentioned, go on the Stuart McDonald website and watch their videos about how to do actual binding. And I guarantee you, if they have any sort of, okay, this is the super ultra advanced binding course, I guarantee it's going to be discussing how to do the lower horn on a Les Paul restoration, Les Paul custom restoration. Because what is it? It is a 7-ply binding. It is 6 plies at 20,000 each. I'm pretty sure it might be 10,000, but then the very last piece is going to be about a little over 60 thousandths, or right at about 60 thousandths. So I'd like to say this: that's absolute master level binding. And see how many holding have I got here? 1, 2, 3, 4. I've only got 4 pieces right there. And I think it would go white, black, white. I don't know. It's irrelevant. Yeah. Your Les Paul custom basically would be white, black, white. You know, like from the body out, white, black, white, and then black, white, black. And then your outside piece would be your outside white. So what is that? That is a 7-ply Les Paul custom binding, or it is a Robert Benedetto jazz guitar, D'Angelico, probably the Gibson L5. They were probably 7-ply. I know the Les Paul custom that I restored, that was an 81, it was a 7-ply top, but then the back was 5-ply. And I remember thinking, oh, thank God, it's just two less. But I did do the back first. It didn't matter because I've done a ton of this. But all the more important, and when I was watching the Robert Benedetto video, I don't know if this would be online, but man, he's got an actual large hollow body, does not have the neck in it. He starts right here, and then he does the whole guitar just like that, all at once, just exactly like what I just showed you. And he glued every bit of that at once. It is absolutely mind-numbing to watch it take place. And it's the most brilliant thing I've ever seen. And it's not difficult, but it's definitely, there's no room for error. And also, when you're doing your tape work, you've got to be very consistent on how much tension you put on the taping, because if you had crushing pressure right here and real loose pressure up here, well, then all this 20 thousandths binding is going to swell differently. And when I say swell, it'll be a distortion. It'll be an absolute visual distortion that even the untrained eye could see. But what will get you in trouble is to over pull. Like when you're doing the really, really long, like if you're really pulling down here, you'll pull so tight that the binding cement will melt and crush and stretch. It'll stretch out the 20 thousandths, and then you'll lose it. And I only had that happen once, and I had to route every bit of it off because it was so unsightly. And I remember really torquing on that, trying to hold it in place so it wouldn't swell. What I should have just done is just done a regular job and just make certain that I taped it, incrementally, and just work my way around doing the job. I wish there's some way I could do that on camera, but there's just not. The only way I could do that is if I'm building like a Les Paul custom restoration or a replica. And quite frankly, I don't ever want to build a Les Paul custom replica. It's not worth it. And quite frankly, I don't really like them. I think they're way too busy. I think it should have been a 5-ply binding on the top, and it should have been a 3-ply binding on the back. And then that would have been a really beautiful, tasteful little guitar, because I think that 7-ply binding on the front per jazz body standards, which is like the Venetian, no, not the Venetian, the Florentine. No, the Florentine is the sharp cut. The Venetian is the round, like the large round horn for like your traditional jazz guitar. The Florentine is the sharp cut, and the Venetian corner is really beautiful, and that's fine because you're only turning around a corner that's probably a 3-inch diameter or 2.5-inch diameter. But when you're working around this Les Paul, that's literally a 3/8 inch diameter. That's hard to turn that. Okay, so if you want to do binding, good luck. That's all I can say. You're going to need a little bit of luck, but you're also going to need to just watch some videos and experiment a little bit. But don't be deceived into thinking if you pull off a single piece of binding that you're ready to jump up and start doing multiply. It's a very delicate thing, and it's just you can just it's hard to explain. You can just feel when it's working properly, or you can also feel when you're struggling, or you can feel when you're losing control. And if you feel like you're losing control, I say stop and back up and punt, or because that's something you'll never get rid of. Uh, and also, what was I going to say? Um, once it, I was going to say something that was kind of profound, but then I lost my train of thought. It was just based on, yeah, if you're losing control, just go ahead and stop. Oh, I know. Oh, I'm so glad I thought of this. Uh, because if you're doing a 7-ply binding, each one of those pieces of binding, they average about $5 to $10 for each piece. So that equates to roughly, 7 pieces on the back, five on the front, 5 on the back, then the fretboard. You could end up with $250 just in your binding. That's a very complex binding job. And what I'm saying is, if you don't know what you're doing, that's going to be either a horrific reminder of what you didn't know how to pull it off, or it's going to be crazy expensive to route it off and start over. So the stuff is not expensive, but it is if you lose it, have to start over. Okay, 37 minutes. Let me think. What else should I talk about? That's probably about it because I don't want to discourage anyone from building the guitar, and all the more reason why with this video series, the single ply binding is actually really enjoyable to do, and should be pretty easy to keep under control as long as you don't force a cold piece of binding to bend around that corner, but then don't melt it either. Okay. So anyway, I'm very happy with it. It's coming together really well, and it should be a really beautiful guitar body. The next time you see it, it will definitely have binding on it, and the binding will already be shaped. I'll cover this briefly. You could go ahead and do your Goldtop first, all the spray work, but then you're going to have to tape it off very precise. And I would say it's going to work against you because if you have tape up here on the body where you're protecting all this beautiful paint, now when you do your now when you've got your binding, and you're holding it in, and you want to come up here and come across and tape it, well, you didn't reach up into the wood. And see, it would be impossible down here. There's not going to be any wood surface to tape to. And what's going to happen, you have a far more likelihood that tape, the last piece of tape that you did, you have a great likelihood that it's going to slip, or it's going to cause this to pull a little bit. But whereas if you have this unfinished wood surface right here, I can assure you, man, you're going to have a real strong, immovable tape joint right there. And you see my point? But if you were trying to protect this top, then it's going to work against you, especially if you're doing multiply binding, where you're truly surgically trying to keep an eye on 5 or 3, even if you're only trying to keep an eye on 3 to 5 pieces, you've got to make certain that once you tape that and hold it in place, that it does not creep or slip at all. And the acetone based glue This stuff is brutal. It'll melt tape, it'll melt and pulls everything, it'll cause it to lose its adhesion. So, but it'll also melt off lacquer. So I say that to say this. I say go ahead and do the binding job with a raw body, then just be prepared to, after it's finished, come in here and do your real precise tape work along that edge. And then because see, before you, this is actually a really complex part of the build. After the binding dries and is cured, I should say, then you're going to scrape it, and you're going to want to use I don't know where they are. They're on the table, buried under something over there. You're just like large wood scrapers, like your large scraper, and you're going to want to scrape that binding nice and flush, with the top, and get everything clean and finished. But don't round it over yet. That's not important. But you want it to just be nice and flush. Then once it's nice and flush, then you want to just tape off right up to that edge, and then do all of your top spray. But make certain that it would actually be better if you did not tape this, but after you do your spray work, then take a razor blade and scrape it back. But I say that to say this, I much prefer to go ahead and do some real fine tape work right up to the very edge. But then if I'm going to see anything, I want to see just a little bit of binding. But if I get up onto the maple, well, then the gold is not going to cover unless it creeps under the tape, and we don't want that. But typically, even Robert Benedetto was talking about, it's like, well, he said, most people typically just go ahead and allow their lacquer and their spray work on the top to be done, like if he's doing a sunburst type, like a tobacco burst, typical old arch top, he would just go ahead and spray the binding, and then he would just scrape the binding back to a finish point, and he knew where that last little piece of 20 thousandths binding was to scrape to. But that's a very tedious scrape job, and it just is. But nonetheless, experiment with it if you want. But if you're going to do multiply binding, definitely watch some videos, and you might get some better information out there. But I don't think you're going to find any sort of information that's going to say, oh yeah, do it exactly this way, and then it's easy and it works the first time, and you remove that tape and you got a finished guitar. That's only one of the last operations. Getting the binding on the body still is going to require an enormous amount of shape work and scraping in order to get to that finished guitar. So, and that's why we do this. We do this stuff because we like the challenge. But sometimes I don't want the challenge of doing like a Les Paul custom type or a jazz guitar. I don't have a problem doing a jazz guitar body because, as I said, they're big and round, very easy. And once I saw Robert Benedetto do the whole, literally 7 pieces at one time, I realized, oh wow, that's really not that difficult. Because if you've got a good channel and good intentions, and you're following in a counterclockwise fashion if you're right-handed, or possibly a clockwise fashion if you're left. Yeah. I mean, if you're left-handed, you're working from this point around here, so you'd be working in a counterclockwise fashion or a clockwise fashion. If I said that wrong, okay, if you're left-handed, you would be doing it in a clockwise fashion. If you're right-handed, you're doing it in a counterclockwise fashion, because you're using your right hand to push that binding and all that glue out. What I'm getting, you're wanting to push the excess glue out as you're pushing those together. Okay, I hope that wasn't just a bunch of idiotic conversation, but it's one of those things where if there's some way you could find the Robert Benedetto video series, they're definitely worth the investment. I think they're about $300 to $400 new for a 9 to 13 hour course, but you probably could pick up a set used. You got to see the video. You can't just read the book and figure it out. You got to watch him actually do the binding job. And the reason I'm bringing this up if there's anybody out there that's watching my video series that's really thinking about going into luthier type work, if you get really good at doing binding, and I mean master level, there is an enormous amount of money to be made, especially today, because there are a ton, and have been for like the last 15 to 25 years, because there are a ton of ten to $20,000 guitars out there that the binding is rotted off of it. And if you and I've heard stories of session musicians up in Nashville, and I'm sure all over the world, where they're like, they're not about to touch their vintage, whatever that prize guitar is, because they know most people would just screw up the finish doing the binding. But if you can get really good at doing, especially restoration binding and replicating like the old, like if someone had a mid-50s Gibson Les Paul that all the binding was rotted, Les Paul Custom, that all the binding was rotted off, you're going to be able to pick your price, what you charge to do that. However, you better make certain you have really good insurance in case you don't pull it off. So there's a part of me, I've thought about doing that, where I just change gears, stop building guitars, and just start offering that service. But it's a very difficult job, and as I mentioned earlier, it's really hard on your hands. But you probably could make some very, very good money doing that, especially if there was some way that you could figure out how to guarantee that you don't damage, 75-year-old nitrocellulose lacquer finish on a $250,000 guitar. But if you can pull that stuff off, probably some really good money to be made out there. Okay, so I appreciate you guys dropping in. I don't think there's anything else I want to talk about. There's other things I could talk about, but I got to do this binding job because I want it finished today. And then that way, once this binding is finished and cured, then I'm able to scrape it, clip it, flush it, get this neck installed, and this thing will very quickly turn into a husk, which will be prepared or be ready to receive all the fretboard work, because I want to get all this work done before I do the finish work, so that once I go into fretboard mode and cutting fret slots, we've already got this stuff behind us. So again, I appreciate you guys dropping in, and I'll try to clean the table off a little bit, but for the most part, all parts binding. I don't think I've talked about this. I should have covered this, sorry. I think I did in one of the videos that I erased. Where you're going with a parchment binding, that's the cream. I know this is cream, this is not ivory, but all parts binding is the only binding that I have found that is really beautiful colors. But in between these two colors, they make one called the ivory, and it's an absolutely beautiful color as well. I've never done the cream binding on a guitar that wasn't absolutely beautiful, but since we were going towards more 50s specs, it actually would have been more of a, I can't remember what it's called. It might have been parchment. It was kind of like a linen white. It wasn't stark white, but nonetheless, we're going with a parchment white on this guitar body and neck, but the cream is really beautiful. And if you think that's too creamy or too yellow, then you definitely could go with the ivory. Because like if you were doing like a real snow white guitar, the parchment would be really beautiful. But if you wanted your binding to have a little bit more warmth than the snow white body, then the ivory would be pretty. The cream might get a little bit too yellow, so you have to be careful. Just depends on which type of guitar, which type of guitar body you're going to be doing. See what happens. Parchment's really beautiful. Okay, appreciate it, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.